Without any further delay, come into tonight's session on frugal product marketing. Let me give an introduction to our acclaimed and admired speaker of tonight, Jessie Paul. Jessie has 25 years of experience in marketing, always on a tight budget. She was global brand manager for Infosys during its hectic growth era of the late 90s and early 2000s. She headed marketing for challenger brand iGate, now a part of Capgemini, and went on to be the chief marketing officer of Wipro Technologies for 5 years, during which it quadrupled its revenues to $4 billion. In 2010, Jessie founded Paul Writer, a marketing advisory firm that works with global and Indian clients to maximize marketing impact through consulting and content strategy. Multiple organizations have sought her expertise on their boards, and she is an independent director on the board of Bajaj Customer Care, Expelio Solutions, Great Assess Grameen, and Royal Orchid Hotels. Her book, No Money Marketing, From Upstart to Big Brand on a Frugal Budget, was published by Tata McGraw-Hill and was based on her experience putting Indian brands on the global map. Jessie holds an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and a bachelor's degree from National Institute of Technology, Trichy. A very warm welcome to you, Jessie. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us tonight. Handing the session over to you now.
Thanks so much, Shama, and thanks to everybody for joining me today, this evening rather. And I am looking forward to having a very interactive session. So as Shama said, any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat window on Zoom or on LinkedIn, and I will try to reply to you as soon as possible. So let's keep this interactive. I'm going to share my session, the deck with you in a minute. But before that, I do want to kind of set the context that I'm going to be sharing frameworks and models that I hope you can apply to your personal businesses or your products. And we're going to look for ways in which we can do efficient marketing. So that's really the theme. It isn't always low cost, but it is going to be around trying to do stuff that is effective, efficient, and works well for a challenger. So people often ask me, so if I'm a big brand, do I really need to look at low cost marketing? Yes, you do, unless you are the biggest brand. So everybody needs to think about marketing in an efficient way so that you can actually get more money or more buck for your money. So here we go. Perfect. Okay, great. So let's start. And Shama, if there are questions, you're going to have to tell me, because when I'm presenting, I can't really, see the chat window as well.
Done.
Okay. So
Jessie, I'm sorry, one more thing. Could you go full screen with these slides?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Screen is clear. Everything is clear. Let me start. And we're going to talk about, so this first slide is just to talk a little bit about where I got these ideas from. So it's partly across the three areas of my career. So the most recent ones have been the board positions, and I've worked, as Shama said, in 4 organizations and managed brands within that. And also for the last 10 odd years, I've been running my own company, Paul Writer, and we've had the privilege to work with a number of brands, sometimes challengers, sometimes established. So my ideas come really from my experience working with these brands. And I have to confess that I have not worn the hat of a product marketer, or rather product manager. I am a marketer, and that's really been my role, but it overlaps a good deal with product management. And so hopefully my insights will apply there. And I thought a lot about this session, and I feel that it works best when we think about an effective marketing campaign right from the product design. Like not when the fully baked product arrives and someone says, oh, it's a chocolate cake, never mind. I want to have, pineapple icing on top of that. So it has to come from the planning stage where you say, okay, I'm looking for pineapple icing, and therefore please make me vanilla cake with buttercream, etc. It's got to work that way. So the models I'm going to share really are trying to also make the marketing easier from a product design perspective. So the first principle that I think works really well when you want to do efficient marketing is to think sharp, which basically means to try to narrow down as much as possible. We all like to kind of say, oh, I do this, I do that. My product can do a number of things. But if you want to be efficient and effective, it really helps to narrow it down. And even from our personal stories, think sharp really works. um, it's the elevator pitch. So when someone asks you, what are you or what do you do, it helps to narrow it down and say, hey, I am a product marketer, or I'm a product manager, or I build brands. If you're able to say that rather than, hey, I build brands and I also help with this and I like PR and I'm an engineer, it gets complicated. It takes longer, more time to get your messaging across. And the more time you take, the more expensive it is. So the sharper we are, the easier it is. And so this is my first model that I wanted to share with you. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's been actually super handy for me since I came across it around 15 years ago. It's a Harvard model called the ABCD model. So it talks about breaking up a product into four attributes. What is the value that it brings to the table, the added value? And B is what's a behavioral change that is required. C is how complex it is. And D is diffusion. Now, from a product design perspective, all four are super important. And we'll talk a little bit about added value because that's actually the crux to a successful product, which is how much more or new things can this thing do against what already exists in the market. Behavioral change basically means that it's always cheaper if my customer doesn't have to change anything in order to use me. So, if you take a very simple example like toothpaste, if you're already in the habit of brushing your teeth, then just switching to a new toothpaste is pretty easy for you. Whereas if I use charcoal or tooth powder or something, convincing me to move to a toothpaste requires more conversation, more selling, and that always is more expensive. So you always want to minimize the behavioral change expected from the user. And I'll share some examples for this as well. Complexity is how simple is it to explain what my product does? And again, that's super handy because the more you have to communicate, the more expensive it is. So if I have to tell you that you need to do this and it works on the cloud and you need XGB storage and tell me where to save it, you've lost me and you have to tell me much more. Whereas if I just say, hey, open it, download, and it goes, it's much easier to sell that product. So that's the ABC. And the diffusion, like I said, is a very, very important part of low cost marketing, which is where the product can actually sell itself. So every time I use this product, somebody else hears about it or sees me using it, and maybe they want the same thing. So if I eat a lollipop, you want one too, because you see me walking down the street with my lollipop. And that's, for example, when you see someone with a takeaway cup of coffee, like Starbucks or Coffee Day, you want one too. And you tend to be like, where did he get that from? I want to follow him and get that one for myself. So that's diffusion as well. Um, so ABCD model is a simple way to remember this. And Shama, if I can ask you to tell me what the Q&A is. I see one that's come up.
Yes, so this question is from Vipul. How do we explain the iPod taking over from CD and just killing cassettes that were in the cheapest alternative at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Behavioral change must have happened a lot, right?
So behavioral change, if it's positive, one tends to do that. But actually, iPod was a substitute really for the Walkman. And you were already used to carrying, even before that, a transistor radio around with you. The iPod just made mobile music easier for you, but it didn't require you to suddenly start carrying a gizmo around to listen to music. So it wasn't that hard, and complexity was very low at the time. I mean, there were lots of ripoffs as well, but it was pretty simple. And we'll come to iPod as an example for diffusion. I have a slide on that. And Okay. Okay. Um, So the next concept that I wanted to share with you was the branding house. And this is the added value. And to answer your question on how does a product like say the iPod succeeds, um, you really have to answer all the questions here, but the most important is really why not buy someone else? So these are just three questions that every product has to answer. The first is what are you? And that's important too because you can define yourself as a transport service, or I can define myself as a chauffeur service. So if you remember Uber, they always said, oh, it's a driver for everyone. So it wasn't a car on hire, but your personal driver. So the who am I question can also determine how easy it is to make an entry into the market, where you just say that, look, you can either say I'm a chef, or you can say I am food ready cooked, easy for you to eat, which I'm sending to your house. It makes a difference in positioning what you are. Um, so you could choose to be a service, you could choose to be a product, you could choose to be luxury, you could choose to be DIY, all of that matters. So the who am I defines your product identity. And I could say I am, the wireless Walkman, or I could say I'm this whole new thing. So you decide what's easier for you to position yourself as. The why by me really answers the questions about what are the benefits that your clients would like from this particular product. And everybody has a bunch of reasons as to why this product is so good. But the crux really is, can you also answer why not buy someone else? Um, it's super easy to get a product, like the attributes of the product. But when you look at it in the context of the competition, it also becomes, why should you choose me and not all those people out there? And, to make it even more relatable, I would say that when you're looking for a job, this is the same thing that we go through. So when you send in your CV or you go for an interview, everybody spends a lot of time on the who am I. And even like the why by me is like, I'm qualified from here, I did a course in product leadership, I've got all of that. But remember that you're not the only candidate appearing for this particular job or role. And the interviewer really needs to understand why not choose one of those other 10 candidates that I shortlisted. So that's where it becomes super handy to say, oh, but I'm the only one who has interned in the right industry, or I am the only one who is award winning in this category, or look, I already researched your product and I have some great ideas and nobody else has those ideas, they're uniquely mine. So I think that it's super important to spend time on the why not by someone else, because otherwise, you spend a lot on marketing, but you leave it to the customer to actually decide why are they choosing you or your product over all the others. So it's like an a la carte where you say, look, I've got these 10 beautiful features, and you go ahead and pick the one that works for you. And you might find that, yeah, okay, my pricing was awesome or my screen was awesome, but I am unable to actually say that my screen is the best or I am the best at pricing. So you leave that offer on the table, and therefore you would have to market or put money behind your 10 attributes instead of being able to limit yourself to just one. And if you go back to the history of the iPod, at the time, it was pretty much the only well-known kind of tool that you could take digital music and listen to. So that's your big differentiator, right? So it's not mobile music, it's that it's actually digital music, which you could not get from, let's say, the CD player. So I wanted to share some examples because don't know about you, but for me, it helps to have examples. And Shama, if you could let me know what the question is.
Yeah. So this question is from Vijay.
Mhm.
Diffusion, how can it be related to real life product like mobile, feature edition or feature edition to software product?
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about it, and I have a slide on diffusion, so we'll talk a little bit more there. But when
Another
product,
question, would you
yeah,
like to take that?
yeah, sure.
Okay, so this question is from Akanksha.
Hmm.
Could you please share some insights you may have for a B2B SaaS startup looking to market a category creator in the industry?
Okay, sure. So we'll be covered, and if I don't, come back to me in 3 slides, and we'll ask the same question again, because I do have some B2B SaaS examples as well as the iPod. So when we talk about thinking sharp or narrowly, one example is Freshdesk versus Zendesk. So when Freshdesk launched, it did not say, oh, I can do this and I am essentially a CRM, ERP, whatever tool, which they are today. They just took on one line item of a product, which was Zendesk. And they went very sharply against that one product. Zendesk had just raised its prices, and that was the trigger to create Freshdesk itself. And Girish talks a lot about why he did it and how he did it, but essentially it was a marketing game of targeting one product at a time. Now they've expanded, and it's easier to remember what all they do, but Freshdesk was just one service line, and it was super easy to do that. And if you see now, they are targeting Salesforce. With like a year or two ago, they did the Salesforce campaign where they flew this blimp around Salesforce's biggest conference. Again, at any given point in time, when you only target one company, then you get more mileage and talked about. Plus, it's far more easy to, um, let's say, focus your limited budgets on this one particular product, right? Now, Happiest Minds was a client that I worked with, and again, now it is big, 100 million IPO and all of that. But when we were actually doing the roadmap or the VC presentation for it, and we really wanted to identify a spot that the other IT services would not immediately show up and be like, yeah, we also do that. And the insight that Ashok had was that they all do a lot of legacy IT work, and therefore cannot be purely digital. They have they do a bunch of old maintenance and whatever work. So the differentiation for Happiest Minds was that it was a digital only company, and that again gives you a very small space to play, and you can expand from that small space. But it clearly distinguishes you from all the others, where you say that, look, use me because I'm the only company really focused on that. Plus, look at my heritage and all of that, right? um, if you've been tracking the battle of Cybermed versus let's say um, Dove, or any of them for that matter, Santur, everybody, they're taking on the fight. Again, it's super easy for Sebamed because it just has one idea in its head, which is a pH, that its pH is 5.5 or whatever. They really haven't tried to say why the pH matters and so on, but they like to talk about it a lot. And it's creating a lot of discussion on one attribute, which is their strong point and not anybody else's strong point, and it allows them to focus their limited budgets on one messaging, and the rest of it is really coming from the other brands talking about it, taking them to court and all of that good stuff, right? So these are ways in which you can really focus your marketing efforts by thinking sharp and picking a very clear differentiation for yourself. So, wanted to talk about diffusion, a lot of interest in that. So, the iPod actually, and I don't know if you remember the heydays when the iPod came out. One of the problems that the designers of the iPod actually had was twofold. One is it was really small, and so you would tend to carry it in your pocket, which is a big selling point. You didn't have this clunky Walkman type device that you had to lug about. But from a diffusion perspective, that was actually a challenge because you can't actually see the product, right? So, how do I know that you're running around with my new product, and how would people ask for it? But at the time, all the headphones that we had were black, but the iPod had white headphones. So the moment you saw the white headphones in somebody's ears, you knew that they were using an iPod. And in your mind, it was like, okay, he's got one, he's got one. So it started to become a viral phenomenon, so much so that there were a lot of fake white headphones that then came out. So even if you didn't have an iPod and you had, one of those lookalike thingies, you would want to have white headphones to prove that, okay, you too had the iPod. So that was very cleverly thought through aspect of diffusion from Apple. It was distinctive and it helped them with diffusion. If you look at Uber, again, they built it into the product that when you wanted to share a referral, you got a code and you typed it in, and everybody has a code to share with their friends. Now, in the launch period, it's more important than later, but it's still there and it's super working for them. So it's already baked into the app that when I want to share that I'm using this tool, it's super easy for me to do that. I mentioned the case of, say, Starbucks, where again you roam around with the branded cup, but I also have fancy mugs for you to buy. And again, you're a walking billboard in that case, similar to Nike, when every time I sell you a t shirt, I'm reinforcing my own brand. Um, Hotmail was one of the first to do digital viral diffusion. So get your free email at Hotmail. Later on, it was, I think, Yahoo. And then, of course, it was sent from my iPhone. So these are ways in which they do that. Now, you ask me, how do I do this for B2B SaaS? Again, it depends on your product. But for example, if you use Dropbox, you can see the diffusion every time someone uses that. If you look at Canva, they're forever pestering you, saying, why don't you just share it with your friends instead of mailing it to them? So you have to think through. So even if it's an invoicing software, you'll see at the bottom the invoice was created with XYZ. Then you have the contractual software. So if you are a SaaS product, there are a lot of ways to bake it into your product that when anyone is using it, they're able to see who made the product. If you're in a freemium, again, the free model always says made with so and so. The challenge actually is when you're doing large B2B enterprise software, when it's custom built, it's hard to say that this thing was built by Wipro or Infosys or whatever. So there you actually have to consciously work on testimonials and so on. It's much harder actually in that particular case, and that would be the exception to the easy diffusion that's already built into the product. But the other aspect of that is that B2B generally does not spread amongst other users. You typically go to another company or industry user. It's not that we're all on the same software and so I want the same one. That's typically not how it works. So the front end might be visible and others might say, oh, I want this one, but not for large enterprise software. So if you're, let's say, doing an AI tool, say a chatbot, then I would want virality, and that I can do. But I cannot do it unless, I mean, I have an app or a front end that I actually own and control. And it also depends a little bit on your brand as to whether clients allow you to do that or whether they'll just pay you to take your name off that. So this was my slide on diffusion. So if there are further questions on diffusion, I would like to take them now. Okay, Shama, are there any questions or do I assume that I've answered them?
No questions as of now.
Okay, great. And I'm going to move to my next concept, which is the opposite of what I just said, which is think broad. And I will explain a little bit about what I mean by that. So this is a concept I like to talk about, which is core versus surround. And I wanted to share so when I was joining Infosys, we were new to Bangalore and we needed a house on rent. And in those days, and now also, everybody wanted a company lease or a well-known brand, safer for them. And so we were really struggling to find a house because nobody had actually heard of Infosys. Until I found this wonderful old man who was like, oh, yeah, sure, Infosys. I've heard of Infosys. It's a wonderful bus company. And that was because in those days, the only visible part of Infosys were the buses picking up employees everywhere. And he'd seen those blue branded buses. And he was like, okay, it's a big company. At the time, I did not want to correct him. But this was actually an example of how there's a difference between what you are actually delivering to the customer, but another thing is what you're actually known for. So when I talk about core, these are the elements that are directly related to what your service or your product does. So if you take an example of, let's say, a phone, it does phones. I mean, you can do calls, you can see a screen, you can send email. That's really what matters. But if you look on the left side and you see this around, so these are the inputs. The country of origin actually now matters a lot. So if you go online, you see people asking, where is this phone from? And if you remember, Apple has been doing this for years, designed in California, made in China. But now guys like Huawei and so on, they're also in the same problem of country of origin becoming very important, not on the core aspects of their brand, but because of perception. So people, for example, a chocolate does, any one of things, but if you have a Swiss chocolate, it is so much nicer than a chocolate made, let's say, in China, maybe for you, I don't know. But the imagery of a Swiss Toblerone is built and baked into you. And so you want to really, consider um, where the product is made over its core attributes. So Amul, for example, makes Swiss cheese. They make the Emmental cheese. But it doesn't taste the same to you because in your mind, the moment I say it's Swiss Emmental cheese, it starts to tell a very different story. Similarly, if you look at executive management, a lot of people think that Tesla is super awesome. But it's also because Tesla has Elon Musk, who's forever building his own story and his own brand. And you think that it's a super cool product also because Elon Musk is directly involved. Richard Branson for Virgin, they all make a difference. Ratan Tata for Trust in India for the Tatas. Whoever is the executive matters more than you would like to admit, even though you might be super happy with the core actual product and services. Um, Sham, I'm going to just interrupt you for a sec. Um, I'm getting a lot of messages saying people haven't got the link for the webinar. So would you be able to take a look at that?
Sure. You're
They
getting
say
the
they've
messages?
registered, but they haven't got the link.
Oh, let me just check that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So, when I say think broader, it is that you could choose to be a very functional brand and talk about only why this product does what it's supposed to do. But if you broadened your storyline to include the surround attributes, you have a ton of things to talk about. And sometimes you may have to change the story or the elements of the brand in order to fit that storyline. So, for example, when was talking to a particular brand, um, there was a lot of importance about where will the company headquarters be. And I wanted them to say that it is in Singapore or US or wherever, rather than, let's say, it's in India and you have to take a call and say that, you might have to move your location in order to build the story. So, country of origin, you could choose where to manufacture it, and that becomes a part of your product management story. Pricing, are you the cheapest, the best, can be plus or minus. There are famous examples of where being the cheapest does not help you actually. So, there are many examples of where surround branding matters as much as the core value of the brand. Just 1 second. Um, any questions on this point?
Yes, Jesse, we have one question.
Sure.
What would be your top tips to market want-based services, example, online music classes, as opposed to need-based services or products? What do I get people to try me once? How do I get them to try me once apart from giving it away free?
Why should I try you? So in my view, so there is a functional attribute, and that would be a minimal crowd which says, look, I am looking for guitar classes, so why don't I use this service? That's one. But if you look at somebody like, say, Spotify, so the core delivery is music like everybody else, but they actually do far better on the storytelling aspects. So they talk about custom playlists, they talk about, who made this playlist. So I would actually look at making it cooler in terms of why should I learn from you, or why should I learn, guitar? So someone, let's say you pick Raghu Dixit and he does interviews on why he learned or how he learned or something like that. I think that might actually get more interest in trying out the service and push it from functional to aspirational. So I think the goal when you do surround marketing is to move away from the bare functionality to the surround. And I'll give you another example, which is so Apple Music has these radio stations and they've had them for a while. And what matters is also now, like they always had these collections, like say 80s music, 90s music. But now, if you see, 80s music is curated by someone who's really famous from the 80s, like say Huey Lewis and the News. So that whole storyline is now owned by him, and they have tons of people actually hosting their radio shows. So it's no longer about the music, but it's about who is presenting the music. The RJ has become super important to me. And that again builds a story around this brand. So I would generally say work on two things. One is, why should they choose you and not the other options around there? And the second is, if you're looking to expand your market, then adding the surround features to it would matter a lot. So, country of origin, for example, if I'm an Indian provider, but I say I have global services and I have, let's say, the best guitarist from Denmark is online or Scandinavia or whatever, that would make a difference in my perception as well. If I said that my founder is himself, a music buff or does whatever, that would matter as well. So I would actually say focus on that. And if you're looking at music classes, maybe from a diffusion perspective, maybe you do joint jam sessions hosted. I mean, that's a consulting engagement, but try to get the word out with the diffusion aspect. Yeah. Shama, there's one more question.
Yes, let's take that. This is from Chaitali. What
Mhm.
should be the marketing and pricing strategy for an AI platform product, mainly for B2B customers? As regarding pricing, often it's difficult to do the revenue projections.
Okay, pricing strategy is a whole new ball game, not something I can answer as a part of a question. It would depend a lot on what's the pricing of your competitors and what's the value that you're going to deliver. And also, if your customers or your prospects are getting it for free elsewhere, then you are in trouble as to why should they pay more for you. So pricing, I would not like to comment. I would just like to say that pricing, unless you are superlative, you're the most expensive or the cheapest, it really shouldn't matter from a product offtake as long as you can make the case that you're delivering value.
Jesse, there's another question from
Mhm.
Jitesh.
Mhm.
Initially, you mentioned about being narrow, but now surround seems contradictory.
Yeah, so the narrow is where I pick my space to play. So if I'm fresh desk, I say, okay, I only do help desk. That's a bit which is the narrow bit. But thereafter, if you actually read up and see what fresh desk was up to, their Zendesk actually fought back saying, oh, these are some Indians who don't know anything. So they happily said, yeah, we're from India and we're proud about it. And they added that into their storyline. Girish Mathrubootham actually started writing blogs and then he won, I think, a hacker something competition. So he started talking about how he's a cool dude who has created it. So while the space to play was very narrowly chosen, um, the think broad is to start building a more engaging story around the product and to build out the product with so many support points that I want, aspirationally, I want to associate with you, and it moves beyond the core delivery. Also, to go back to the previous one, when we talk about pricing, it was so. One of my first brands at Ogilvy was actually the launch of RPG Cellular in 1996. And at the time, phones were horrendously expensive. So, not just the actual hardware, but also the cost of the phone was a peak minute was 1680 rupees as picked by the government. So, it was quite a painful thing to sell. But even in those days, if you sold on price, you would not get it. So we never sold on price. It was always about the value that you can deliver. I mean, if you had a phone, you would not lose business. So in those days, it was actually sold as a business tool, not a personal accessory. But we never talked about price. I think it took us a whole year before we even put price of the phone in our ads, because um, you cannot make price the only point. And like I said, sometimes it backfires, but generally speaking, price becomes a sensitive issue. You only talk price after you have sold your product. And to sell the product, honestly, telling a broader story helps. And it's across kind of product categories. So if you take even a soap brand like Unilever, all the environmental concerns do matter to them. Um, if you take any of the big IT firms, they also talk about their environmental commitment, how they're green and ISO certified and everything else, because it matters to their customers and to their employees that they work in an eco-friendly company. So broadening the story helps. You don't have to change your actual product offering, but to find all the aspects around it to share, it gives marketing more stories to tell, right? Any more questions?
So I was just checking the LinkedIn thread as well, and we have a few questions there. So
Mhm.
Kanika says, well explained, core and surround. Can you explain from consumer industry like electronics, retail as well?
Right. So, if we're talking a consumer product, and again, I mentioned the phone, where suddenly country of origin has become super important. If it's about a retailer, then what would really matter is corporate governance. So, for example, if you take Amazon, they may not have the product, but you certainly trust them to, let's say, accept your return. So that matters a lot to you. If it's big basket, again, it's not just the product and the quality, but you also care about the executive management. They've got a whole book out there about it. They talk about how they will always return your stuff and they have a vision. So there is a bunch of things that any brand can share about why it's so good. And it always surprises me that, more people don't do that. So for example, if you take the hotel industry, it's not just about like I have these X rooms. They always talk about the vision for hospitality, how much training they do, and they're running all these courses for the disadvantaged to join the hotel industry. So when you go into a hotel, you pretty much know their corporate story, and so it's not just a room; it's what they stand for. More retailers could actually tell that story as well, and they don't, and I think they should. Particularly now when you're coming back, from the whole COVID lockdown, I want to know about your hygiene story. I want to know about, did you lay off people, and if you did you get them back, and are you giving them any sanitation, like hygiene guidelines? Any of that suddenly starts to matter a lot for you. um and even from the retail perspective, so I know of situations where during the lockdown, um, you couldn't actually go out and sell. So FMCG could not sell. But as a commitment to employees, some companies said that, look, don't worry, we're not going to fire anybody, right? We may have to give pay cuts, but we're not going to fire anybody. And that gave people the confidence that, okay, I should try to sell. That's step one. Step two is, I know of organizations which sat tight and said, oh, we can't go to the market, too bad. And others who said, okay, we can't go to the market, but how about we call all our distributors and retailers and everybody and check if they're okay, and use our sales force to actually coordinate help if they need it. So you could do a bunch of outbound calls. I think at the peak, they were doing around 32,000 calls a day, just talking to people and saying, "Are you okay?" And this was a whole organization that was just roped in to call people and say, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No sales, right? So, in any industry, if you sat down with these surround attributes, I think you would find many more stories to personalize the experience. And you never know which bit would matter to a particular customer. But when we focus only on the core, I actually have a very low tolerance for failure as well. So, if you buy a brand that is very well respected, like let's say it's a German car and things go wrong, you don't blame the car, you blame yourself first. Okay, so you go to the guy, he'll be like, "Oh no, you are pushing the brakes too hard, that's why this thing, uh, the brake lining wore out." Whereas if it's a cheaper car, they'd be like, "Yeah, okay, this car is cheap, that's why it falls apart." So and you don't need a better example than any Apple user, where if the laptop conks, it's, "Oh, I spilled stuff on it, I banged on it," so you blame yourself. And that's because you have such a high respect for the story that they have told you and how invincible or how good their product is. It comes from California. Steve Jobs designed it personally for you, and they've been so nice about it, and everything else. The Geek Bar, it's all built around that one storyline. So I think there is potential in every industry to tell the story. I just feel not everybody tries to do this or communicate the vision. Everybody wants a bigger story. And the simplest example is Cadbury's Dairy Milk. And you don't buy it for the chocolate, it's because you've seen the ads over the years, and it's a thing of happiness, it's a point of celebration. So years and years ago, they ran an ad, "Papu pass ho gaya." And still, when the kid passes, you want to buy it a Cadbury Dairy's milk, because in your mind it's associated with passing a test. So that's the kind of storytelling that sticks to you, where it has nothing to do with the core product, but it's your association that this particular brand is for happiness, right? Any questions, or should I move on?
We have a few questions, but do you want to take it forward or should we attend to them now itself?
Are they related to what's already happened? And I'll take them now. Otherwise, I'll do the next slide.
I think we'll just move on with the presentation little. We'll take this
Okay.
at a later point.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So these are some examples of brands that I think have applied the core versus surround. So I mentioned Elon Musk, and um, I don't think, I mean, very few brands would actually get away with what he gets away with. And that's because you have respect for him, you have respect for the brand, and he's told you an amazing story of how he puts things together. And so you respect the engineering, you respect a bunch of things. So the core product actually in this case was a failure, but still it's doing so well. People were still interested in it, right? And that's because he is who he is. Um, Amul pretty much owns a story of how they're helping farmers, and they're associated with the Taste of India, and they've had a very consistent campaign for years and years. And that's another example of where I stick to my guns and say I'm focused on dairy and only on dairy, and I only source from my cooperatives. But when I say think broad, I actually take a lot of stances on anything that is Indian, on anything that's contemporary. I have a say, and that helps me to tell my story. So much so that people generally would trust Amul to come up with a good dairy product, um, because you feel that hey, they're sourcing from farmers and they have nothing in it to start watering it down. And so for them to go after, let's say, Unilever Quality Walls ice cream and say, "Oh, that's not cream, that's a frozen dessert," it actually works for them because the brand has been established so strongly. And they talk about the farmers, they have an app for the farmers, they show how much they're giving back to them. So every time you buy from Amul, you also feel that you are helping the farmer community. um, Poco, a new success, is interesting. And this is it. I mean, they are trying to change the story. So, are you made in India or not? It should not matter to your final output. But since now the story has to change, everybody started incorporating this made in India into their storyline, and it works or doesn't depending on how authentic it is. But somebody has made it a story to talk about. I mentioned Sebamed earlier, and again, we don't know what exactly a pH of 5.5 will do for your skin, because for me, the anomaly is that water itself is 7. So as soon as you use soap and water, you're already using something which is harsh as per their definition. But nonetheless, they have made everyone talk about the pH level of soap and put very big guys on the defensive by bringing in something which they have introduced as a core attribute. But if you also notice in the ads, they also say made in Germany. So they've brought in another aspect to justify why is their product twice the price of the other alternative, right? So these are ways in which you can broaden the story, and it has to be thought through at the product design level as well, because some of these things have to be baked into the product. It can't just be done later. For example, if you take IT services, we talked about people. So if you look at like Google, the way they hire, you know that you have to pass this very serious test. Infosys also used to be really hard to get in because you had this very serious test. But there was also other stuff like, for example, Infosys had stated that all class 4 employees would come from the locality around the campus in Bangalore. So you felt that you were giving back. And that was, again, a press story. So by taking an IT services company, but expanding it to saying, how am I contributing back to the community around me by putting in a foundation before it was mandatory, I started having so many more stories to talk about, including the buildings, everything. I could talk about so many things which had nothing to do with the actual IT delivery that I was, supposed to be doing. Um, and one more slide on the surround aspect. So when we talk about the brand, and so I also wanted to talk a little bit about Nano, which, if you ask me, was defeated by a surround attribute, which was price. And it was actually, I mean, I know that, Ratan Tata meant very well when he wanted to come out with a poor man's car, but he forgot that from a branding perspective, nobody wants to drive a poor man's car. Everybody wants to have a luxury car at a price they can afford. So it was a positioning error in saying that only poor people need this car. And the car was fine. I mean, the core attributes were fine. It got killed actually by the surround attributes, right? I wanted to show you also this brand of tea, and it's a very simple thing that if I serve you tea in a silver teapot, you are going to think it is more expensive, tastier, more expensive, all of that, than if I serve it to you in an aluminium kettle on the roadside. So that's a simple example of the tea tastes exactly the same, but because it came in this fancy teapot, you think it's very luxurious. When we say oranges, Nagpur oranges are a premium. It's just where it comes from. It does not impact its core delivery, but it's a brand. You think Nagpur oranges are better, so hey, I mean, I'll pay a premium for a Nagpur orange, even if you don't strictly know where it came from. The Infosys buildings, again, at the time, nobody had fancy campuses. It was a great way to expand the story and talk about this awesome campus, with the hidden thing that, of course, I mean, if you had an awesome campus, you must have awesome people and therefore awesome software. Um, ASUG was another example of a community where it actually does a lot of sales for SAP, in that they have this vibrant community which also runs its own trade shows and events. It also gives you a way to connect back to SAP and give feedback. And so you feel safer with a large product community than one which does not. So when we talk about B2B enterprise software and how will I do diffusion, one way is to set up your user group for the community. So now it's like, oh, okay, everybody I respect is a part of this community. It must be pretty safe for me to buy this particular product. And hey, let me ask them, how are you doing on licensing, or have you had any issues migrating to the cloud? I can also tap into the network and get that informal feedback. Shama, if there are any questions pertaining to this bit, I can take it now.
Sure. So there's this question from Vijay. Understand that based on core aspects, the surround attributes to make the story interesting to think broad. Am I right in understanding?
Yeah, so think broad is to make the story interesting and to expand it beyond the functional benefit of the product to an emotional benefit as well. So, like I said, a chocolate is a chocolate, but when I tell you it's from Switzerland, it conveys something else for you. When I tell you that this tea is brewed in a silver teapot, it tastes better for you. So, I'm bringing out aspects. So, I don't know if you've heard of the silver tips tea. Apparently, it can only be harvested on a moonlit night. And the moment you hear that story, that tea tastes different. So there's also civet coffee, it tastes different. If I tell you my office is in Mountain View, California, tastes, well, yeah, that software sounds more reliable for you. If I tell you that my manufacturing unit is entirely run by robots, that sounds interesting. So, and if I tell you that my help desk is manned by underprivileged women whom I sent through college and they now work for me and so on, again, that makes a difference to the way you perceive it. Um, and I'll just stop with one simple example. I mean, if you've been to like a hotel or some companies, you'll see that they're wearing a badge saying, I'm a trainee. And what that does for you is at the moment I say I'm a trainee, you treat me differently. You're nicer to me than if I tell you that I haven't a clue. So my product delivery actually has gone down, but because I told you that I'm a trainee and I'm new on the job, you're going to be nicer to me, and therefore the experience changes. So it's a way to distract the customer a little bit from your core or functional attributes and give a big picture emotional bonding with the brand, right? So I'm going to move to my next think broad concept, which is also to work the ecosystem. Um, so product managers often are told to focus on the customer and be the voice of the customer, and that's perfectly correct. But you also should look at the fact that the decision maker is influenced by all these other people, the government, employees, journalists, all of these people have a role in deciding whether to buy this thing or not. So, if there is a way in which the product can incorporate the feedback or get diffusion amongst these people, then it's super awesome. And I will give you an example of IT services, the good old Infosys days. So, the challenge was that in those days, nobody really thought that IT services from India were going to be great. So, that was a challenge. And the low cost was fine, but then it also meant that while I really wanted the 30% saving, I also was feeling that, okay, if the software is cheap, then maybe it's not so good. So, one of the first academics or influencers that Infosys and later the whole IT industry used was the Carnegie Mellon. They had something called the CMM level rating, which was to say that your software is repeatable and follows a process and it's really good. And Infosys was certified at a level 4 out of 5 initially, and that was a big deal because now we don't have to say we're good, but Carnegie Mellon's structure says we're super good. So that already baked it in. Then when you go in and get certified on a bunch of other things, you again are involving a larger ecosystem, because then when a client goes to them and says, hey, is anyone else certified on this thing? They'll be, yeah, here's my list of companies who are certified. And essentially, they're also doing the sales for you. When you become a member of a government body or a trade show, a trade event, like say NASCOM, they also do the sales for you. So when you bake it into the whole product design that all of these guys are involved, for example, employees, some products actually say this was created by so and so. In some cases, you can actually embed that, okay, this is being answered by so and so, this question was answered, so help desk or designed by. You can start to make aspects of your product more human and incorporate all of these people into the actual design then again it becomes broader, and the story literally tells itself. Shama, any questions?
Yes, there's this one question from Kalyani,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a little bit on the pricing end, but we'll take it. How much does social media marketing contribute for a new app? If one has to allocate budget for social media, how would you suggest to go forward with it? And how much can be the influence?
Okay, too broad a question. I can't answer that. It depends on your category, depends on a bunch of things. Um, it would be a percentage of your overall marketing budget. And again, pricing and your budgeting, it's a much deeper question. I really can't answer that over here. Does social media matter? Of course it does, because people can pretty much shut your product down if they don't like it on social media. Will you actually sell? I would not say social media, I would say word of mouth. So anything you can do to get diffusion and word of mouth, of course. So somebody like Truecaller or Signal is entirely getting downloads based on social. And I don't think Signal spent a penny on it. So, like I said, it's a very complicated question on pricing.
Right. So this next question is from Rohit.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to know if frugal marketing is a part of a broad thinking. If a startup wants to create a brand using a story, it takes time and money, and both are expensive resources. Would love to hear your thoughts because I'm sure I'm missing something. So he's not able to connect the dots between how frugal is part of product marketing or thinking broad. So there's this
Frugal.
question in the Q&A. You can also check it out in that
Okay.
section.
So the frugal part is basically if you want to be efficient with whatever you're spending, that's all it is. I'm just giving you ways in which your marketing can be more effective. And if you look at time and money, yeah, you of course need both. Typically, frugal marketing means that you would try to do more with time than with money if money is in short supply. So your CEO would do more talking. You would probably, make your stuff more easily accessible. So you would do a lot of things in-house that maybe I could, pay for an ad and do. So if you take somebody like say Truecaller, they've just started doing ads. Now, clearly along the journey they didn't do too many ads because print media is expensive, but now that they are no longer a tiny startup, they've chosen to do the ads. If you take somebody like Freshworks, they do one campaign a year because that's what they can afford, but it gets them disproportionate value. So when you do a blimp, which is Failforce, you get a multiplier effect from PR and media, and the analysts and everybody else talks about you. And that's what I mean by frugal. It's not that you didn't spend any money, but whatever you spent was calculated to maximize the benefit. If you look at even Happiest Minds, the logo was a project that I did with them. And so one of the initial goals was to get the news out amongst potential employees. So we ran it as a competition. And so we tied up with, I think, Times Group or somebody to help publicize it. They had a division. But it was really, we got around 1,000 people who applied and sent in their logo choices, and we stayed in touch with them. So we got a lot of excitement around creating the logo, and that got the name out there at a very low cost. So not only did we save the money that we would have paid an agency to make a logo, but we also got a lot of noise done for pretty much low cost. Another client I had was called Bhartiya City, and they were launching a new project in North Bangalore. And that area wasn't very well known, and Bhartiya was a first time developer. But we got lucky in that we had not started construction. We had a lot of like 100 acres. And there was a ban on using palace grounds for concerts. There was a dispute going on, and the government banned it. And Santana was on his way to India, and he was supposed to perform at palace grounds, but that was off limits. So we got in touch and said, hey, you could use our, we level the place and give it to you. You could host your concert at Bhartiya City. And so we got a lot of publicity because they had to give directions to the place, and everybody had to go past our experience center. So that's again Frugal. Our expense to get Santana to perform was, I think, 4 lakhs, which was essentially the leveling. Everything else was done by DNA Networks. So that's what I mean by Frugal, just to give some examples. I would like to share some more examples which might help to talk more about the broad bit. So, Tally has been immensely successful. If you try to use anything else, like QuickBooks, any of you who is an entrepreneur will realize that it's pretty hard to convince your CA to switch from Tally. They are most comfortable with Tally. So, one reason is that they've really worked the CA community and worked hard on it, right? Paytm got a lot of mileage when they did this ad, so it helps to say that the government supports us. That was indirectly what they were saying. Ola built its network with the ex-serviceman community and said you could be a driver with us. And Byju's again likes to say we're not competing with teachers, we're collaborating with the teachers. So special teachers day outreach and so on. Jagore has run numerous campaigns, but again, because this was about putting women first, it's a very nice endorsement from Shah Rukh Khan saying that, okay, in my future movies, my co-actor, his name is going to come first. But, it goes beyond paying Shah Rukh Khan for an endorsement. This is because my story is compelling, that he also sounds credible, and you're actually showing that you're driving change. So that's what I mean by working the ecosystem. And I would like to mention that none of these ideas actually cost them a lot of money. In fact, none. I mean, they're just telling the story using whatever they would have done anyway, but they're not sales stories, they're community building stories. And that's actually what gives more traction to the product message that they have. Any questions before I move on to the next and the final section?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
how important is diffusion for a startup? Making a touch point to range of stakeholders in ecosystem, can it still be frugal?
So, if you are a startup, diffusion is super important for you because literally it means that your customers are selling it on your behalf. So imagine that you were a new t-shirt brand and you could get everybody to wear your logo like Nike does. Obviously, you wouldn't have to do half the marketing that you wanted to. Um, Diffusion is something like, like Kylie's lipsticks, where she launches and everybody says, "Oh, I'm wearing it, I'm wearing it." Um, and of course, you facilitate and say, hey, why don't you post your look on my Instagram and so on? Yeah, sure. But diffusion is super awesome. And we talked about Signal, we talked about Truecaller, we talked about WhatsApp. These are all companies that have cracked diffusion. And the product, basically, you can't use the product without being a billboard for that product. And that's really perfect for them. Zoom as well, it was viral, it was diffusion, because when you said Zoom conference, you had to send the link, and the other person would be, oh, you're using Zoom, okay, cool, I could do that too. So I would say diffusion is super awesome. But B2B enterprise, you would have to build a community. So if you go back to the previous one, you might have to create a way in which, like ASUG, um, it's not obvious to other users that you run on SAP. So you're going to have to do testimonial campaigns. You're going to have to set up a user community. That's how you'll get the message out. If I was like at Infosys, we started doing customer forums because we wanted people to know and get reassured that others were using us. So if your product cannot be made in a way that it sells itself to others, you'll have to use testimonial customers, getting them to be your talking heads and endorsing it, referral codes, those kind of things start to matter more for you. But yeah, diffusion is the easiest and the cheapest way to get your product to sell itself. So I also wanted to put up the 6 pillars of persuasion, and this is not, you can take it as product design advice or marketing advice. It comes from something called, it was my insights as well as Google's messy middle research. And it says that when people come in to buy, these are the 6 things that matter to them. And you can Google that for your, if you want to read the whole report. It was done primarily around online purchases and during COVID, but I think it works for anything. So the first one is superlative heuristic, and you need to have one attribute that really stands out and which matters to your potential buyers. So, what I mean by this is that, um, for example, if you take a phone, maybe what really matters to everybody is the camera. So, if I'm able to say that I have the best camera at this price point, then that is sufficient for someone to decide that this particular phone is great for me. If, like, on time delivery is what really matters, then again, I just say that, for example, TCS always had this thing of managing uncertainty. So if that's the one thing that matters, sure. If I'm a data center and I say 99.9% uptime, that's all that matters. So you look for the one attribute that matters to your customers, and you say, I'm the only person who can do that for you. The second is trusted authority. We like someone else to do our due diligence for us. So if you say trusted by dentists, or you say that CMM level, or you say whatever security rating, or you whatever. I mean, anything like that. If someone I trust, Shah Rukh Khan, anybody says this is awesome, um, it shortcuts my decision making process. And then, of course, I like to know that everybody else has bought this thing. I'm not the first. We like to go with the herd. So if the product makes it obvious that my network is using this product, then it makes my decision making much easier for me. Which is why you will see in many products that, oh, 1,000 users, and in your network, so and so uses it. That's what they're trying to do with that. The power of now, often what happens when we have the luxury of time is that we don't make a decision. So there's no push to buy it today, and therefore I'll say I'll make it tomorrow, but then it just sits in my cart and I never actually do it, which is why offers which expire at midnight or whatever, I mean, how you craft them and make them genuine matters. But if there is no immediacy to the offer, I tend not to close the deal. Scarcity bias is where, again, if you tell me that it can be bought at any time and there's plenty available, then I actually don't ever buy it because I forget. I don't have a rush to go out and get this thing. So, again, if you say, oh, it's only the top 10, or you can only sign up till this time, the moment it looks like this particular thing is a special offer, I start getting excited, which is why so many brands will say, oh, this is only now, special offer before year end or something like that, to create a little bit of a scarcity bias around it. Or I look at options saying, I'm changing my pricing next month and so on. So I start adding that for a scarcity perspective. And then, of course, the power of free. We apparently love getting anything for free. It doesn't have to be the whole product, but I want to get something that is free along with it. And again, personal experience, I bought a fairly expensive car, and again, having been trained by Maruti, you're looking at them like, aren't you going to give me something free? And those guys then look around and say, okay, here's a keychain for you. And you're like, okay, the car was like 30 lakhs and I'm getting a keychain, but you're still happy, super happy. So 10 years down the line, I'm still happy that I have this keychain free and I still have it. So we like to get something for free. We feel that that adds value, even though our brain should tell us that you just spent 30 lakhs keychain, no big deal. But we still like it. So this again is something that you should consider as when you do the checklist of, is your product ready to launch? See whether you have actually structured these six elements around it. I have some examples again, where top five gaming phones, what are the criteria? So these may not be the best phones in general, but because they have segmented themselves as gaming phones, they can own a superlative if they're able to meet this criteria. Um, Valid till stocks last. However many sales you go to, you're always worried that the best stuff has gone away. Um, I remember this Inbox Zero product. You had to sign up, and they told you that you have, hundreds and thousands of people ahead of you, and you still went up and signed up because you just thought that, it's such a desirable product now. Authority. So everyone, picks one of these and tries to own it. And if you're a startup, I would look at all six and see how much of this I could incorporate. So I have my last slide. If there are any questions before that, I will take them and then move into this one. Sorry. Shama, any questions?
No, Jessie, you can continue.
Okay, sure. So I just want to leave you with five trends that I see. And one is make it easy for me. I think this 2020 has taught a lot of us that we have to do stuff ourselves. And we really want any product that makes our life easier. Everybody's feeling a little, shall we say, haggard and stressed out and everything else. So any product that shows that you can make it easier for them, I think people like. Um, Second big trend that I think will continue is DIY. We are moving away as a nation from do it for me to do it yourself. 1 year has been great training, and at least in aspects that we enjoyed, we are probably okay to continue with DIY, and products that require you to have less help are going to work. Third is asynchronous communication, because we all are working now more or less digitally and online and so on. Asynchronous, it works, right? I don't want to pick up the phone and have a call. I would rather leave you a WhatsApp message and have you get back to me on WhatsApp itself, because I may be working late night and I expect that you will respond in my time frame and with less interruptions, because it's like a work life continuum for a lot of people today. More marketing, less sales. I'm seeing this trend more in B2B, where because of this year, we have gotten used to working without direct sales, and we consume a lot more content and make our own decisions with less hand holding. So sales comes in to help me at the final choice, but the erstwhile process where every interaction was through sales has reduced. I'm kind of okay to talk to the guy who makes the product, the CEO, and so on. So that's changed. And lastly, I think our relationship with space has changed. Not the space as in that space, but workspace, home space. We all are using less space than we ever did. And so, how we use space is going to be a big game changer. And anyone who's capitalizing on the new needs in this partial work from home, which I actually feel will continue uh, to a great extent in 2021, also has a winner of an idea. So, with this, I'm finished with my thoughts. If there are any questions or discussions, happy to hear.
So we have this one question, Jesse. We'll take this one last one considering the time, and we have already taken too much of your time, I believe. Thank you for that. So, as a startup, what qualities should I be looking at in a marketing firm to partner with? How should I structure the engagement? What should be the top red flags that tells me I should stay away?
Wish everybody knew that. Okay, so how should you structure the engagement is up to you, but one of the worst models to structure an engagement is actually a retainer model, because that actually puts the advantage entirely in the agency's court and not you. So I would look at any model where I pay per deliverables, like there's some SLAs defined, and there is certain amount of fee that I would pay for the inputs that they give me, but then I also want the outputs to be controlled by the same agency. So the milestones have to be also that you delivered X and I pay you X. So definitely one way to structure that is that. Second is, of course, um, unless you are specific that you want to avoid cliched thinking, I would look at agencies that have experience in your space. Um, it's hard to teach someone your domain, and you want someone who's worked in the space before. Third is anyone who tells you that you have to do things a certain way, or you have to do, let's say, traditional media. I think I would probably structure it and say, okay, why don't you give me three plans? one of which has traditional media, the second of which is only digital, and the third is where I have no paid media at all, is entirely organic. And then compare the three and decide which one it is that I want to do. But I actually did another session for startups on the principles of communication, and one of the things that startups can do to make it easier for their marketing teams is to build their executive brand. So when as a company you don't have a brand, it's super important that the founders work on their executive brand. And when you have to choose between time and money, then if you're going to spend time, then you really have to focus on your own time being used for marketing activities. So often I find, particularly in tech startups, that they want to outsource marketing and do the tech in-house. My advice to everyone actually is, if you're really good at tech, you know how to hire a good guy for tech. So why don't you do that and take up marketing as your challenge? Because if you are unfamiliar with marketing, chances are that you don't recognize a good marketing guy, and a good one is expensive as well. So you're better off doing it yourself when you can recognize a good tech agency or a good tech guy. So that's my advice on that.
Right. So for the last part of the session, Jessie, we'll need your help. Like promised before, at the start of the session, we'll be rewarding one attendee with the free digital course from IPL.
Mm-hmm.
And please help us select the best question, and that question will get a reward.
Okay, now which question?
So you can see that in the answered section, the ones we
Yeah,
took.
just going in.
Yeah.
Vipul Chandra?
Vipul Chandra. Right. The first question actually that we took.
Yeah.
Yes. So Vipul, congratulations on winning the free course, and we'll get in touch with you shortly with the reward. We have enjoyed having you with us, Jessie. It's been a complete pleasure. Please accept the certificate of appreciation from the Institute. The QR code on the certificate will take you to a dedicated Hall of Fame page that we have created for you with the recording of this video.
Okay.
You'll be able to view it by tomorrow. And
Okay.
please share it within your network, and we'll be sharing the webinar recording on our YouTube channel as well.
Sure.
We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and amazing insights drawn from your years of research and experience in the industry, Jessie. And
Thank
I'm
you.
certain that our audience will definitely benefit from the methods you suggested and get ahead in their career. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
And audience, thank you for joining us. It was great interacting with you all. Do not forget to register for the webinar on 27th. And with that note, I end tonight's session. Happy learning and stay skilled. Have a great night.